We'll start out with a roll call of members.
Unknown participant is now joining.
Board Member Meyer.
Unknown
Here.
participant is now
Board Member
joining.
Lee.
Present.
Board Member Janetta.
Present. Okay,
Two participants are now joining.
I'd just like to note that the committee's role in this process is to make a recommendation to the full board on whether the board should reappoint the current chief district public defender to another 4-year term, or whether the board should open up
Is
the
now
position
joining.
for applicants.
Unknown participant is now joining.
Let's open the position to applicants. Nothing precludes the current chief from applying for that position. So that's what we're here to do. The agenda today is going to be the 4th Judicial Chief Public Defender reappointment process. The 10th District Public
Is
Defender
now joining.
process will be delayed as Ms. Murphy had a family situation that she could not meet with us today. The committee has received the reappointment evaluation from the state public defender and Ms. Moriarty's letter on her accomplished goals, challenges. We've also received a letter from Ms. Moriarty in response to Mr. Ward's evaluation. Board members have received a large volume of emails, letters, and correspondence from the public.
Two participants are now
These have
joining.
been read and considered by committee members. Ordinarily, this committee deals with private personnel data, and so these committee meetings are not public. This is the right of the employee, and it's for the protection of the employee. In this case, Ms. Moriarty has indicated she would like to waive that right. Ms. Moriarty, are you indeed waiving your right to a closed meeting on the reappointment process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you acknowledge in what would ordinarily be a private personnel data will be discussed in a public meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. So she has waived her right, Ms. Moriarty has waived her right to private personnel data being discussed in a public meeting, but others have not. So again, all remarks in question should pertain to Ms. Moriarty and her performance. I'd like to start this by calling on the state public defender, Bill Ward, to provide a brief summary of his evaluation, and then we'll call on the chief public defender,
Joshua Dostal.
Is now
Mary
joining.
So, Bill, could you start with your summary?
Nick Lambert.
Is now exiting.
Madam Chair, as has been past practice, I'll make a few comments and I'll yield the floor to Ms. Moriarty. I want to start off by acknowledging the support of Ms. Moriarty in the form of the emails, many Twitter posts, and letters. Ms. Moriarty is praised for her work for fighting against racial injustices, inequity, and racism in the system.
Is now exiting.
I appreciate the individuals who spoke out and wrote about their concerns on these issues and how they want to make sure that we continue to fight in these areas.
Is now joining.
I applaud Ms. Moriarty's efforts in this area as well. I wrote as much in my memo to this board. In reading from my memo, without doubt, Ms. Moriarty is a noted trainer
is now joining.
and gifted litigator. Ms. Moriarty ably voices concerns
Is now joining.
our clients face relative to injustices in the criminal court system and has worked towards community involvement in the system. These attributes and characteristics are important for a leader in our agency to possess. Ms. Moriarty's efforts in this area have never, ever been a concern. I also wrote
Is now joining.
that these attributes do not make up for the deficits that exist under Ms. Moriarty's leadership, including questionable management decisions, inability to work professionally and effectively with other stakeholders, inability to address or focus on the details necessary to run a district office, inability to collaboratively or to work collaboratively within the agency.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
I would like to remind people to use your devices. We have a lot of
her inability to
Now
work
exiting.
collaboratively within the agency, refusal to follow directives, and refusal to take responsibility for her actions. Those are the issues. When this process started at the end of last
3
year, a narrative was
participants
put
are now
forth
joining.
that this board took action against Ms. Moriarty for speaking out against racial injustice or fighting on behalf of our clients against the actions of the police, city, or county attorney's offices. The same narrative is perpetuated for months. It continues to this day. I cannot tell you who is organizing the effort, but the content is basically the same. And I quote, this has been in dozens and dozens of posts. The board is attempting to punish Ms. Moriarty for speaking about racist treatment of clients by the police and the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. This narrative is absolutely and unquestionably false. To perpetuate or condone this narrative demonstrates that a
Duchess
complete lack
Harris
Is now
of
joining.
insight into the concerns about Ms. Moriarty's ability to fulfill her duties as chief, denigrates this board, this agency, our leadership, and our staff. Our entire agency focuses on issues and actions.
3 participants are now joining.
I would ask that people put their phones on mute because I'm hearing an echo.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Molly, I got muted by someone or something.
Okay, we've corrected that, Bill. Please continue. Please start back about 3 minutes into this, because you were muted for part of it.
I'll start again. When the process started last year in talking to Mary about the issues that were brought to this board, somehow, some way, a narrative was put forth that this board was taking action against Ms. Moriarty for speaking out against racial injustice or fighting on behalf of our clients against the actions of the police, the city attorney's office, and the county attorney's office. As I said earlier, and I'm probably on mute, the same narrative is perpetuated for months.
Is now joining.
Day. I don't know who's organizing the effort, but the content is basically the same. That somehow this board is attempting to punish Ms. Moriarty for speaking about
Is now
race
joining.
by the police and by the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. The narrative is absolutely and unquestionably false.
Catherine Boland?
Is now exiting.
And as I said, to perpetuate and condone the narrative demonstrates a complete lack of insight into concerns about Ms. Moriarty's ability to fulfill her duties as chief. And in my opinion, it denigrates this board, this agency, our leadership, and our staff. Our entire agency focuses on issues and actions of racial disparities and racism in the system. It is who we are, and it's been that way since I joined this agency in 2001. Ms. Moriarty is not alone in this effort. To suggest otherwise brushes a demeaning stroke against our entire statewide staff that fights these rampant issues throughout the state of Minnesota.
2
The
participants
concerns
are now
outlined
joining.
in my memo focus on the board, focus on management decision points and ability to fulfill the duties as chief. As you mentioned earlier at the beginning in your comments, Madam Chair, Ms. Moriarty provided this board with a 25-page memo in response to my memo regarding her reappointment. I've read and reread Ms. Moriarty's 25-page memo, and I kept an open mind. My takeaway is the same. Ms. Moriarty does not appreciate her actions, nor does she take responsibility for them. It concerns me whether she has the management abilities to fulfill her duties. While Ms. Moriarty wrote about how she has worked hard to gain insight on her past decision-making, particularly her mistakes, that is not evident from the body of her memo. In her memo, Ms. Moriarty writes how she's been saddled, and these are her words, with the letter of reprimand. She's also told you how she and her lawyer thought that your reprimand was illegal. She places blame on numerous individuals for her actions and questions the timing of the original investigation, not based on her actions, but more of a conspiratorial nature. Additionally, Ms. Moriarty now alleges that there are, quote unquote,
Is now
elements
joining.
of gender bias in my behavior towards her, by reminding you that she's the first woman to hold that position and claims I've used the term young lady with her. You don't need to be reminded that half of our chiefs are women, 3 of whom were appointed under my leadership, one of which, of course, was Ms. Moriarty. Half of our management team are women. I've never used the term young lady to Ms. Moriarty, any of our chiefs, managers, or staff. I don't even use that term in speaking to my 18-year-old daughter. Ms. Moriarty's lack of insight permeates the memo. I'll give you a case in point. I'm not going to belabor this issue over and over, but this was the board member the presentation of the budget by Ms. Moriarty to Hennepin County, where they fund a portion of the budget for our office there in the 4th District. In her memo to you, Ms. Moriarty still avows that her statements last October to the Hennepin County Board concerning the budget were basically off the cuff in response to a commissioner's question. And you know that's just not true. You know that she talked about this board in an offensive way, and it was planned. These are her words. She told Hennepin County commissioners that the state, meaning you, the state board takeover is a failed experiment. Those are her words. Quote, we went into the system kicking and screaming, referring to something that occurred over 2 decades ago. She continues to refer to the state, quote unquote, over and over, forgetting that Ms. Moriarty is appointed as a state chief public defender. She said, the quote, the state philosophically rejects steps according to years of service.
Is now joining.
That demonstrates a complete lack of insight into the union negotiations that we're involved in every 2 years. Quote, we have to ask the state for a salary. Quote, they, the state, undercuts the salary the person thinks they're going to get. Quote, take us back. Quote, I have to remind you, we were a county department. We did not want to go. And quote, I realize it's money, but the solution is for Hennepin County to take us back. Instead of recognizing that this entire part of her presentation denigrates this board and our agency and reflects poorly on her management decision-making ability, Ms. Moriarty continues to claim that the remarks were off the cuff and not prepared. She tells us that had she not answered the commissioner's questions honestly, it would have reflected poorly on her credibility. And her proof that it was off the cuff was that it wasn't in her slides. Ms. Moriarty takes the position she did not discuss with upper management, but you also know that is not true. You know that in her conversation with Ms. Rawls, Ms. Moriarty said that she disagreed with the feedback from her team, her upper management team, about her draft budget presentation. And although a member of the team stated it's the wrong form, Ms. Moriarty disagreed and needed to be guided by her own values and conscience. These are management decisions that Ms. Moriarty has made that undercut this board, this agency, and our staff. As Ms. Moriarty says, she loves her job. I have no doubt she feels honored to have been appointed as the chief. What comes with an honor also comes with, in these leadership positions, what comes with it is responsibilities and duties to this board and to our clients. Madam Chair, I rest on the rest of the comments in what I wrote in my memo to you.
Thank you, Bill. Ms. Moriarty, Mary, I'd like to call on you. You have, let's say, up to 30 minutes to address the evaluation and your reappointment. And then I want to ask our other committee members, if you have questions and we have questions, do you want us to interrupt or say them as we're thinking of them during Ms. Moriarty's presentation, or should we wait to the end? Board Member Lee or Board Member Meyer, do you have a thought on that?
Board Chair Janetta, Committee Chair Janetta, I would respectively say that we should wait with our questions to allow Ms. Moriarty a full opportunity, uninterrupted, to address the key points that she wants to assert.
Either the way, if you want to interrupt me, I have no objection to that, but obviously
Of asking them as they come up?
Yeah.
Okay.
But whatever you want to do is fine by me.
Committee Member Meyer?
Yeah, I don't have a preference. I just have to tell you that I'm having a hard time with Mary's connection. So
yes.
It may be an unstable connection. Maybe it'll sort itself out as we go. I just don't want to have it be an ongoing problem.
Okay.
Okay, Mary. let's just hold our questions down to the end, but try to have about 30 minutes max to address us, and then we'll ask the questions. All right? Okay.
I want to thank all of the board members, personnel committee members. I know some of the board members are also on this call. I want to take you back to the personnel committee almost a year ago. And I want to remind you that I have never had a performance evaluation, despite the fact that under the board's process, the recommendation about whether I should be reappointed is supposed to be based on my performance evaluation as well as other things. And I have never once had a performance evaluation by Mr. Ward in my 6 years as chief. And when I was summoned to appear before the Personnel Committee last December, I was summoned to appear about budget issues and management issues, none of which had ever been brought to my attention before being summoned before the Personnel Committee. And when I appeared, when I appeared before the Personnel Committee, and I know the board chair, Personnel Committee Chair Janetta, and board Personnel Committee member Lee, you were both there. And you remember that you read to me what some of the allegations were against me. And you'll remember that one of the allegations was that I tweeted about lynching. And I said, I retweeted a tweet from Brian Stevenson's organization, Equal Justice Initiative, that we had to remember our legacy of lynching. I told you that in the Personnel Committee. When I got to the investigation, the investigator said to me, well, you tweeted, and not only did you tweet about it, you posted images of lynching. And I said, I did not. I would never have posted images about lynching. And I provided her the copy of the tweet that I made. So that was one of the allegations.
More than 5 participants are now joining.
I was accused of wearing a T-shirt during the investigation.
Unknown participant is now joining.
That I wore a T-shirt from the Black Public Defenders Association that said Black Defenders Matter. And that was one of the criticisms. In fact, our assistant county
is now joining.
said that he would have considered disciplining me for wearing a Black Defenders Matter T-shirt because it was
is now exiting.
But one of the biggest issues, and you remember this, Molly, because you said I was accused of calling a justice partner a racist in public. And I know you remember that because I said to all of you, I have never called a justice partner a racist in public. I would never do that. That would completely shut down the conversation. And if you recall, I said to you, I think you might be referring to something that happened at a bail forum. And at that point, do you recall Mr. Ward jumping in and saying, that's not it? And I turned to you, Molly, and I said, I don't know what it is. If it's public, could you tell me what it is? You shrugged your shoulders and you looked at Mr. Ward, and I never got an answer.
2 participants are now joining.
What I want to say about that is we now know that that was it. We know that from the investigation. I was
now joining
by Ms. Rawls about the bail symposium that was in the investigation. That was the time
unknown participant is now joining
of calling a justice partner a racist.
Is now exiting.
But when I brought that up in an attempt to explain it, Mr. Ward looked me in the eye in front of the two of you and said that wasn't it. And so I didn't have an opportunity to talk about what really happened. And I think it's critical to talk about what happened there. Because as much as Mr. Ward wants to say this isn't about race, he is certainly willing to use my advocacy on racial justice against me. So let's go back to that forum. One thing you need to keep in mind was that there were 3 people on that panel. One was a formerly incarcerated woman, one was the Washington County Attorney, and the other was Mr. Ward. It was a bail forum. There was a large audience.
Lambert
is now
Many-
exiting.
The Washington County Attorney repeatedly called our clients thugs over and over and over, while Mr. Ward sat next to him and said absolutely nothing. There were gasps in the crowd.
Ray
There were murmurs.
Martinetti.
Is now exiting.
It completely shut down that panel. I was sitting at a
Is
table
now joining.
with a number of people, many of whom were people of color, and one Black woman at that table looked at me and said, "Are you going to get your people?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And it was at the question and A, I asked for a microphone, and I stood up and I said, "I'm asking you to check your language, to not use the term thug because it's racially charged." And that prosecutor completely lost it, to the point where the moderator had to grab a microphone and walk up and ask him to get control of himself. And that was pretty much the end of the panel. I went outside during a break in the hallway.
Unknown participant is now joining.
I was talking to somebody, and that Washington County Attorney came up
Is now
and was
exiting.
towering over me. His face was red. He was screaming at me, "You didn't have to do me like that." And I said, "Yes, I did have to say something." And he screamed at me and he said, "Then you and I can never work together again." He was screaming to the point where the people who were conducting the bail forum had to usher him away and tell him he had to leave if he couldn't get control of himself. I can't tell you, well, here's what I can tell you. I have learned
Michelle Brooks.
Is now
that
joining.
had I not said anything, I would have been complicit in what that Washington County Attorney was saying. I had to say
Andrea.
something.
Is now joining.
I'd like to hope I would have said something without my friend saying, "Are you going to say something?" And at that time,
Is now exiting.
I was afraid, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say it now. I was afraid because I knew it would be unpleasant. I wasn't afraid because of things that I've heard my Black friends say, which is when we speak up, we have to be concerned about whether we're going to lose our job, what are the consequences going to be. And that's because I have white privilege. The only thing I was afraid of at that time was that it was going to be unpleasant. I had no idea that it might cost me my job. And one of the things, for Mr. Ward to say
Hannah
it
here.
is hard, this isn't about race.
Is now exiting.
I want to talk to you
KMSP News.
Is now joining.
I want to talk to you about what came out in the investigation, which was interesting because it was a county administrator talking about my conduct in a bail forum. And he said he wasn't present at the bail forum. He wasn't even there. But this is what he said to the investigator. A consultant for this witness who was there reported to this witness that Ms. Moriarty got into a verbal altercation with the Washington County Attorney who was on a
Is
panel
now exiting.
with the consultant and Ms. Moriarty. The consultant reported that Ms. Moriarty made statements that were inflammatory and personal, including accusing the Washington County Attorney of being racist after the meeting. The consultant reported that the result was a dysfunctional
Is now exiting.
presentation that created polarization instead of moving the issue forward. As I said before, there were only 3 people on that panel. So the conclusion apparently is that the consultant was Mr. Ward, who told Mr. Thompson what happened at that meeting and that I created a dysfunctional panel. So this is about race. Don't make any mistake about it. This is about race. It is about my advocacy, or at least people are willing to use my advocacy about race against me. Now, I'm going to take a step back here because when I look at the board, the evaluation goals and performance review, I see that there are 5 board-adopted goals for chief public defenders. Okay, and one of them is to encourage excellent, creative, collaborative advocacy. One is to provide client-centered representation at both the trial and the appellate level. One is to pay continual attention to training, skills development, and mentoring for all staff. The 4th is to demonstrate a commitment to recruiting and retaining a highly dedicated, well-trained, and diverse workforce. And the 5th is to ensure that the statewide system of public defense is a fully involved partner in the criminal justice system. And can I ask, I'm assuming that these are the criteria on which I am to be judged.
Sarah Troutman.
When
Is
you were
now
deciding
exiting.
whether to reappoint me. Is that accurate?
Are you addressing me?
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
anyway.
right, yes, so you've listed the criteria there, yes.
Okay, thank you. So I want to know, this
Is now exiting.
he does not address 4 of these criteria. He never, ever addresses the advocacy of our office, ever, not once. He doesn't ask the justice partners about the advocacy of our office. So 5 of these goals,
Unknown participant is now exiting.
4 of them were never mentioned by Mr. Ward. This is critical because, as you know, as I've said, I have never had a performance evaluation by him. But our office was really fortunate, actually, to be asked to participate in a study by the National Center for State Courts. They interviewed our justice partners, judges, prosecutors, all of these people. They interviewed our clients, and they pulled a lot of data. And I want to read to you some of their quotes.
Patricia Nevin is now joining.
Under Ms. Moriarty's direction, the Hennepin County Public Defender
Manuel Lewis
as
Is now
one of the
exiting.
innovative, highly regarded public defenders' offices in the country. It noted that Hennepin County public defenders are as successful and even more successful in some measures in achieving favorable outcomes for our clients. And it said,
is now joining.
simply said, Mary Moriarty runs one of the best public defenders' offices in the country. We recruit from all over the country. We focus on training. Every one of those 4 metrics on which I am supposed to be measured, we excel at, according to an independent evaluator, the National Center for State Courts. But none of that is mentioned by Mr. Ward, not a single thing. What he does spend time talking
Unknown
about
participant is now exiting.
are, well, and I want to take a step back too. Mr. Ward's memo is entirely a cut and paste anonymous. So even the quote unquote justice partners quotes are completely anonymous, which is interesting because much of it seems to come from the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And I don't know why justice partners can't be, I mean, I understand why staff would be anonymous, but why are justice partners, like judges and prosecutors, anonymous? Although you can tell that much of it is from the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. So it is difficult for me to try to talk about anonymous comments from justice partners. But I want to talk about the last goal, that the statewide system of public defense is a fully involved partner in the criminal justice system. We, under my leadership, are more involved and more collaborative than any other chief. We work with the city, we work with communities, we work with organizations. This is why you have letters from the mayor supporting me and the chief of police in Minneapolis supporting me and many organizations supporting me. We are an active participant in all of that. But as I pointed out in my memo, and we are also on every committee I can think of. We are an active participant in all of that. We are a fully involved partner in the criminal justice system. What Mr. Ward points out seems to be, a quote is in here, that I am not trusted. There are quotes from the assistant county administrator saying that we do things in Hennepin County a certain way. And let me talk to you about that. Mr. Ward said that when I came back from my suspension, and this is in my memo, I did say I was saddled, and I believe that, with a letter of reprimand telling me that I was to be more collaborative with justice partners. I came back in the middle of COVID. My highest priority was the health and safety of our staff and clients. Right when I came back, the courts were trying to push us and actually push into opening
Is now exiting.
The courts for out of custody appearances. We were trying to push back, but at every step, I had to be worried about whether I was going to be fired for trying to protect the health and safety of our staff and clients because of that reprimand. In fact, there was a newspaper article about the fact that the courts were going to reopen for out of custody misdemeanors, and I was quoted as saying that I had concerns about that. Mr. Ward set up a meeting with me and Mark Thompson, Assistant County Administrator, and during that Teams meeting, Mr. Thompson referenced that article and told me
that are now joining.
We don't do things that way in Hennepin County. We don't talk to the press. We support each other. Mr. Ward
is now joining.
That he had received a complaint from justice partners, although he refused to tell me who they were, but I'm assuming judges. And he told me that I had to be concerned about the, quote, hurt feelings.
Maya Gamble
is now joining.
And so if you can imagine, I'm at a meeting, a video meeting with Mark Thompson and Bill Ward, and I'm being told I have to consider the hurt feelings of justice partners. And I'm being told that this isn't how we do things in Hennepin County, that we are to keep things in-house. And so, yes, it's been very difficult to navigate my way through representing our staff and our clients well during the pandemic. So I want to go back and I want to talk about the timing of this. As I said, I'd never had a performance evaluation. None of the issues in the personnel committee had ever been brought to my attention by Bill Ward. And I gave my budget presentation to the county board. I did not plan to ask the county to take us back. I did not. I was asked that question by Commissioner Callison. She said, what is your solution for the salary parity issue? And I said, I think the county should take us back. And so after that, I got a text, or I got an email from David Huff, the county administrator. I was copied on it. And Kevin Kyer had sent him an email undermining me and criticizing me for making misstatements about the budget and asking Mr. Huff to pass along his email to county commissioners. Mr. Kyer did not copy me on that email. I would never have known about it, but Mr. Huff copied me when he forwarded it. I immediately contacted the board chair, Ms. Restovich-Braun, and I emailed her and I said, this is completely inappropriate. Mr. Kyer, instead of picking up the phone and calling me, has undermined me is trying to undermine me with county commissioners and the county administrator. If he thought I made an error, I would have been happy to correct it. So I sent that email to Ms. Restovich-Braun, and she said she needed to look at the video, and that was in October, and I never heard from her again. I never heard from Mr. Ward or Mr. Kyer saying anything about my comment about the county taking us back. The next thing I heard was I suddenly got a summons, essentially, from Mr. Kyer to appear before the Personnel Committee about my budget hearing or statement and management issues. I had to send 2 emails asking for clarification about what these management issues were because I had no idea. Now, a couple of other issues here, and I have outlined most of them in my memo. When Mr. Ward had asked for another term, Mr. Kyer had asked me for feedback. I told Mr. Kyer that I did not want to give feedback about Mr. Ward because I feared retaliation and I didn't think anything would come of it. Mr. Kyer, who was aware of the issues, by the way, had convinced me that he wanted to work on the issues.
2 participants are now joining.
So I
Unknown participant is now exiting.
So I met with Mr. Kyer and I outlined my concerns about Mr. Ward's behavior. And I never heard anything again from the board, from Mr. Kyer. I don't even know if Mr. Kyer presented my concerns to the board. I know that Mr. Ward was reappointed, and I know that his behavior towards me has gotten much worse. So that's some of the timing and some of the events that happened leading up to my suspension. I want to talk about the issue.
2 participants are now joining.
Well, I wanted to talk about this. Mr. Ward does spend a lot of time talking about my relationship with justice partners. And one of the things I did point out in my memo is that Mr. Ward has long said that Justice Gilday hates him. He says that frequently in meetings, chiefs meetings, other meetings. Mr. Ward also did not get along with County Attorney Mike Freeman. Mike Freeman didn't speak to him for quite some time. And as I mentioned in my memo, Tony Cornish, who used to be the head of one of the most important committees for public defense, told Mr. Kyer that he better not bring Mr. Ward along to meetings or Mr. Cornish would get up and leave. And as I said in my memo, I am not bringing up these issues to be critical of Mr. Ward. I'm not. What I'm bringing them up, the reason I'm bringing them up is that there appears to be a double standard when it comes to me.
Unknown participant is now joining.
I also wrote in my memo, and I cut a couple of paragraphs from a newspaper article when the chief public defender in the 2nd District first got his job. There was an article in the paper that talked about how he was held in contempt because of some issues. But there was a quote from a judge there saying that she welcomed him to the court system. He didn't respond. He just icily glared at her, even though she was 1 foot away from him. And he went on, the chief public defender there went on to say, you know, this idea of getting along is just doesn't make any sense. This is crazy. And so I didn't bring that up to criticize the chief public defender in Ramsey County. I brought that up to show that there is a double standard here, that it is okay for the chief public defender to say, and here's the quote, by the way, I think there was sort of a culture of let's just get along. Everybody was kind of in the craziness, and so they just didn't know the craziness. This isn't a good way to administer justice. So my question is, and that behavior was celebrated by Mr. Ward, which I agree with. And so my question is, why am I being criticized by Mr. Ward because some of the justice partners in Hennepin County don't like it when I speak to the press about issues of concern to the public? And that is one of the reasons I said there is definite gender bias here, that there is a double standard for what I do compared to what other chiefs do and what Mr. Ward does.
Is now exiting.
Ms. Moriarty, we have about 5 minutes more of your time. If you can, Mayor. I think she.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Ward says that, I mean, some of the quotes from, it's clear that some of the quotes that he received from justice partners came from the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And this is Mike Freeman. And I think it's important to point out that Mike Freeman told one of the county commissioners last year that he was going to go after my job. And so I looked at Mr. Ward's memo and I see quotes from Mr. Freeman's office where it mentioned that I didn't learn my lesson, essentially, that I still talk to the press.
Is now exiting.
That I complain or I criticize the Hennepin County Attorney's Office for their consistent Brady violations against our clients. That's what I'm being criticized for. It's not that they don't trust me, it's that they know that I will speak to the public about issues of public concern, and they don't like that. You know, you might ask yourself why I have the support of a lot of people in Minneapolis, elected officials and that kind of thing, and that there are people within the county that don't like the fact that I speak out in public, and that you've got Mark Wilson, assistant county administrator, saying that's not the way we do things in Hennepin County. And one of the big differences is this: the leadership, whatever you may make of it in Minneapolis, many people are able to talk about race. They are able to acknowledge that they have made mistakes in the past and try to do.
Participant is now joining.
That is not the culture in the county. And I have seen that consistently, even since the murder of George Floyd. In county meetings, we talk about how, isn't it too bad that the MPD, the Minneapolis Police Department, makes us all look bad. And none of it, we don't look at ourselves.
Unknown participant is now joining.
To see what role all of us have played in mass incarceration and systemic racism. I'm gonna end on this. I, in the last over 9 months, have spent a lot of time reflecting on me, how I grew up, my values, what I think are important, particularly in light of things that are happening here in Minneapolis, even before George Floyd. And I go back to being raised by a father who was a World War II veteran, a decorated World War II veteran who landed as part of D-Day, who always told me growing up that the reason he fought for this country was for him and others to be able to criticize this country and our government, because that was the only way we were going to make it better. And one thing that is happening here is this. We are, as public defenders, part of the system. Our communities perceive us as part of the system, as part of the government, because we are. And when we speak out about what's actually happening in the system and how it oppresses our clients, they don't like that. And they fight back. And that is what's happening to me now. I speak out about the issues that, prosecutor, the county attorney's office, judges, and the county administrator would rather that I not talk about.
Is now joining.
And it's not how I say it, it's that I say it at all. I'm supposed to be a trusted part of the system that tries to work on reform, as much reform as we can get people to be in the system. But if we can't get any more than that, I'm supposed to keep it in-house. And I refuse to do that. I refuse to do that on behalf of our clients and our staff and our community, because especially now it is too critical. We have to talk about the role that each and every one of us in all of our systems play in mass incarceration and systemic racism.
Is now exiting.
So that's who I am. That's what I bring to this role. I know that there are people like Mike Freeman who are unhappy about that. I know that Mark Thompson would rather that we not talk about race. I know there are people like that, but the question is, what role, whose voices is the State Board of Public Defense going to listen to? That is a big question here. Although I will say, going back, and I should circle back to this, I am supposed to be evaluated on these 5 goals that you have adopted. And if you evaluate me on these 5 goals, I should be reappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Meyer or Board Member Lee, committee members, questions, and who wants to start? Board Member Lee?
Yes, I'm unmuting myself.
Okay.
Well, first of all, Ms. Moriarty, or
Unknown
Mary.
participant is now joining.
First of all, you are an incredible representative and advocate against racial injustice, as well as all injustice and fairness when it comes to our system of justice here in the state of Minnesota. I want to address some things that were said. To me, as a board member, and to me as a person of color, when it comes to issues of inequality, disparate treatment, double standards, today is a reappointment process for you. I was there from the beginning at that December 18th meeting throughout this entire process. Throughout your memorandums, the time you've taken to construct them,
is now exiting.
Which I appreciate greatly. And even your presentation this morning, our prior teleconference in March, has spent a great deal of time focusing on relationships with Mr. Ward as well as Mr. Kyer. I want to thank you for raising all these issues to my attention. Because when it comes time to evaluating them, as I am able to as a board member, I can promise you and the public, as a part of my charge as a board member, they will be held to account. I promise you that. But today, you are the focus, and I want to give due deference to that. I want to start by clarifying this process. The Personnel Committee today is meeting to determine a recommendation that it will make to the rest of the board. The board will individually vote on reappointment or non-reappointment and reopening the process. That does not have anything to do with your employment with our State Board of Public Defense. It only has impact on whether you, in fact, will retain the great duties and responsibilities of being a chief within our system. And that, to me, is my focus today and has been my focus as it pertains to you throughout the course of the reprimand, as well as the course of this reappointment process.
Joseph McInnes
is now joining.
And so, again, when it comes to accusations or allegations of double standards being imposed within our state board, our organization, you see, you are far more valuable to me as a board member than any other person outside of our organization when it comes to our responsibility to fight against injustice, unfairness, and inequity, systemically and otherwise. So, my focus is solely today on the performance of you and your responsibilities, your great and unique responsibilities as the Chief Public Defender of the 4th District. Within that, you had asked during your presentation of Chairperson Janetta, are these the criteria that I am going to be evaluated on? And Chairperson Janetta said yes. But there are more things, as you are aware, that you are responsible for and have obligations to as a member, as a leading member of our statewide system of public defense. That arises in the form of a memorandum of understanding, which you signed as a part of your employment as Chief Public Defender, as well as the general board policies. You see, I'm concerned about how we in the State Board of Public Defense work together first and foremost. That cannot be secondary to working with justice partners. So when I hear you say to me, because I specifically asked you at that December 18th meeting, why have you not brought forth the allegations or complaints that you have against Mr. Ward or Mr. Kyer to the board's attention? Because as I laid out to you, there is a hierarchy. We all have superiors here. And I assure you that I will not let these pass. But again, that is what must be maintained throughout our system of public defense. And so I ask you, do you believe that you were doing that when you presented to the County Board of Budget, the county commissioners' budget meeting, that we were a failed system? Do you think that supports a uniform effort within all the employees, the investigators, the staff, the admin people who daily work throughout our entire state on behalf of our residents to advocate for equal justice and fairness? Do you believe that?
Board Member Lee, thank you for reminding me that you asked me about why I hadn't raised my issues about Mr. Ward, because I forgot to tell you something. I did raise these with Board Chair Ms. Restovich-Vaughn. I had extensive
3
conversations
participants are now joining.
with her about the budget process the year before, when the chiefs weren't really consulted about the budget. We were just told what it was going to be. And if you recall, I met with you that year, and I was talking to other board members about these issues. But I had extensive conversations with the board chair, and I told her that Mr. Ward had bullied me and harassed me and retaliated against me. I told her that. And I told Mr. Kyer that. And I remember board member Janetta, you saying to me that Bill said nothing but nice things about me. And I remember saying to you, that's not the Bill I see. You are in a superior position to Mr. Ward, so he's not going to treat you that way. But he is my supervisor. He has bullied me. He has harassed me. And he did call me young lady for years. For years. And so I don't know what else you want me to do. As somebody who, you know, I have brought these issues to people's attention who should have addressed them. I don't know if they've tried to address them, but look where I am right now. How did I get suspended for 3 months, 2 days before Christmas, on issues that had never been brought to my attention before I showed up at that personnel committee? How did that happen? And so I've tried to bring these issues. I don't know what more I can do, but in answer to your question, Board Member Lee, that statement, "It's a failed experiment," was actually Commissioner Opat's statement. Commissioner Opat was referring to the year before. And I have to focus this, this is really important. This is on salary parity. This is totally about salary parity. And the year before, Commissioner Opat said, can we just acknowledge the state takeover is a failed experiment? And what he was referring to was the salary parity issue. Because I want you to know—
Unknown participant is now joining.
Minnesota public defenders are not a failed experiment. Minnesota public defenders are fantastic. They work hard. They work very hard. And not just Minnesota public defenders. As I mentioned, I do training with the paralegals, LOAs. I know so many people throughout the state in public defense. I'm a second generation public defender. My father was a public defender in New Ulm. I believe very much in the dedication of public defender staff. So no, Minnesota public defense is not a failed experiment. It was the salary parity issue that was what Commissioner Opat was referring to.
I just want you to say, I just want you to understand that I have watched that video numerous times. Mm-hmm. And what was crystal clear was that that was not the position you took when Commissioner Opat opened that door and said, whatever, you know, the videotapes had said, but in essence, that can we admit that the state is a failed system? I'm not quoting it verbatim. You did not address his question in that vein. You, as a more, the tape speaks for itself. I don't want to belabor the point. But in fact, you asked, as a part of your presentation, for the county to take you back, which meaning the 4th Judicial District Public Defender's Office. And that had never been discussed with the board, which you gave a presentation to the weeks before. That had never been discussed with us. As been made clear by the independent investigation, it was never discussed with Mr. Ward. It It was never discussed with Mr. Kyer. It was never discussed with Board Chair Brown, Restovich Brown. So I ask you again, do you think that that course, that presentation maintains our statewide system when you're asking for the county to take back the 4th Judicial District from the statewide system?
Well, a couple of things there. I was told by the county administrator that Mr. Ward had had a conversation with him about, it was not a proposal, it was a meeting with the county administrator where there was discussion about the county taking us back. That's what the county administrator told me. So I was aware that Mr. Ward had at least broached the topic, not as a proposal or anything like that. It was the beginning of a
Unknown
discussion.
participant is now exiting.
And I will say, I've watched the video too, and it was, so the comment about failed experiment had to do with salary parity. We always talk about salary parity. That was the discussion. And let me take a step back. So what I had said was that the Board of Public Defense had made the biggest request, actually, I think, in the history of the board about to try to get more money for salaries, but that didn't address the issue.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Salary parity. And so Commissioner Callison asked me directly, what is your solution for this? And I said, well,
Unknown participant is now joining.
So it actually was not part of, I guess if you want to say it's part of my presentation in that I responded to that question, I did. And I'm trying to figure out, so you're asking me if the county did take us back, by the way. This is not, it would require legislation. It would require major discussion. There's nothing unilateral about this, but the topic of conversation about what do we do about salary parity, which is really hurting our office, is one that we need to talk about. And when she asked me directly, well, what's your solution to this? I answered, and I didn't think, I never said I was answering that on behalf of the state board. I would never have said that. But if you asked me now, what is the solution for salary parity? I would probably say, maybe the county taking us back, although I also have some other ideas about that. But it has to be part of the conversation because year after year after year, our staff, we're losing staff right and left because of the salary parity, and it's unfair to our staff who remain here. So I'm sorry that it sounds like you took it as me being critical of the board. I actually was saying that despite this tremendous request that you had made, it still didn't address the issue of salary parity. So I apologize. I never meant it as a criticism of the board. Far from it. Far from it. I meant it that, despite the fact that you had made this request, it still didn't address the salary parity issue.
Committee Member Lee, do you have another question or?
At this time, Chairperson Janetta, I'm going to allow you or I believe I've taken up quite a bit of the time thus far, and I believe Member Meyer and yourself should be given some ample opportunity to follow up on some questions. Thank you.
Committee Member Meyer.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. Can everybody see me? I just turned the video on. Okay. Mary, can you see me?
I can, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for your presentation, Mary. I really appreciate it. And there are just a couple of questions I have. I do plan to share some thoughts later in our meeting.
Unknown participant is now
but-
exiting.
For now, I guess the question I really have is, you're actually a county employee, is that right? I mean, you're paid by the county.
Yes.
And just so that, because we have a lot of public members, I think it's important especially to know the context for that, which was that I think it's over 20 years ago now that the state, over a number of years, transitioned from a county-centric justice system to a statewide justice system. And that involved not only the courts, who used to be funded solely by the counties, transitioning to state funding, but it also involved public defender offices being transitioned from county funded and run entities to a state-run entity. And you were employed by Hennepin County during that transition, is that right?
Yes.
And when did you start working for Hennepin County?
I became a public defender in 1990, but I actually was an investigative intern when I was in college at McAllister here. We don't have that program anymore. And then I was a law clerk here, but I started as a public defender in 1990. And Justice Meyer, if I could add, because I know this is complicated, and I'm glad you brought this up.
I'm just because I just have a couple of questions I just want to ask. So you've been with the office through that transition, and we talk about parity and salary. And I just want to, again, because there are so many public members on board, this is not, the history is not interesting to most people, but I think it does inform our discussion today. And that is the goal of creating the statewide system was to create parity in the state with respect to the quality of representation that accused indigents would receive. In other words, the countywide system provided for an uneven rand of justice, depending on whether you are accused in Crookston or Wilmer or Duluth. It varied widely. The quality of public defender assistance you were given. And that was the undergirding for the statewide system. So I want to talk about parity because that's the word you used to describe some of the interaction that happened with your county meeting that we were talking about with Mr. Lee. The parity you're talking about isn't parity for defendants. The parity you're talking about is parity for salaries within your office, comparing that to the salaries within the office of the Hennepin County Attorney.
Yeah.
So that's the parity we're talking about. Parity of sort of salaries within your office compared to the county attorney's office.
Yeah.
And when this equalization happened because of the statewide system, Hennepin County, because it was a more richly funded county with a much better and rich tax base, lots of big corporations are based here, there's just a lot of revenue. Under the former system, public defenders, compared to their outstate colleagues, got paid significantly more. And now, public defenders around the state are all paid the same.
Brett.
And
is now exiting.
And the reason that's important is that when we talk about parity between your office, you're referring to the Hennepin County office, right? When you say my office. Hennepin County Public
Is
Defender.
now joining.
Yes.
Right, okay. But in fact, I don't have the data at my fingertips, but I do know that under this statewide system, that in more than half the counties in the state, public defenders are on parity with the county prosecutor. That the salaries, in fact, are equivalent, and probably in some cases even more than the county attorney.
That's correct.
Okay. So, as chief public defender, that's actually a state position, right? So it's a little confusing, but it's a state position. In other words, this board appoints you, and you are then a state employee.
Yes and no.
Well, you're accountable. Your accountability is to the state board.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. So, one of the things I looked at in thinking about today's meeting with you is I looked at the chief public defenders in the rest of the state. So you have 9 contemporaries. There are 10 of you altogether. Is that right?
The only reason I'm pausing is there's one chief for 2 districts, and then the appellate office.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Is it roughly 9?
10.
9. They're totally 10. Total of 10.
Yep.
So, what is the position of those chiefs with respect to
is now
salary
joining.
parity? Do you see them as also advocating for their own county in a way that's different than the statewide system, or do you see them advocating at the legislature for parity on a statewide basis?
Other chief public defenders?
Right.
At the legislature?
Yeah, do they take the position that they go to their county boards to ask for relief from whatever salary issues the state public defender system has?
We don't, as chiefs, go to the legislature, but we've been told that it's been communicated that that's Mr. Ward and Mr. Keyer's job. So in terms of, that's why I asked if it was the legislature.
Okay, that's a fair point. And I just wait. But you're unique because when in Hennepin County, you're unique as compared to the rest of the state, because when the state system came into place, anyone who was working for the county at the time in Hennepin County, you were carved out for a special status, so that there were whoever was a county employee at that time continues under the county salary scale until they retire. So presently, in other words, you were, I guess the old term is you're grandfathered in. Is that right? Grandmothered in.
We actually have 2 married couples, county and state employees. You can imagine that. But
yeah,
grandmothered in.
Right. And I think there are about 30 some county employees left. And I think there's roughly 150 state-funded employees. Is that right?
We have about 120 lawyers, over 200 employees, but you're right, we have about 30-something county employees in the rest of our state.
Right, and then as those 30 county employees retire, the person replacing them is hired at the state public defender rate.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great. So if the board later today takes a vote and decides to not extend another contract to you, you would then remain an employee of Hennepin County. You would remain an employee of the office. Is that right?
Well, my understanding of the procedure today is if they vote today that not to reappoint me, what they are doing is inviting other applications. And then at some point, the ad hoc members of the board will also be able to vote. And it's really at that point where it would be determined whether I would remain or not. But you are right. If the board does not retain me as chief, I would go back to being a county employee here. Yeah.
Okay.
Is
So
now joining.
what is your
Unknown
salary
participant is now
now
exiting.
as a chief
Unknown
public
participant is now joining.
I didn't quite hear that.
What is your salary now as a chief public defender?
My salary is the same as every other chief public defender in the state, which is are you asking me the exact number?
Yeah. What's your salary? Yeah.
It's about 161, I believe.
So if you go back to the county, your salary will go down, right?
Correct.
Because the chief public defender is given a boost for the administrative responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the parity that you're describing, it's not the disparity between, you're not fighting for the parity within your office for the people who were former county employees or who are county employees and then state employees. There's a disparity there too, right? Because the former county employees make more than state employees.
Well, there's still county employees, and yes, they make more than our
Participants are now joining.
What I was mentioning was we had two. Now we have one married couple. One is a state employee and one is a county employee, and the county employee makes a lot more than the state employee.
Right. So this system was devised by the legislature, I think, over 20 years ago. And it hasn't run its course yet, I guess is the best way to say it. As people retire, eventually it will phase out this dual salary system.
It will, but one of the things people don't know is that
now exiting.
Does provide us with all of our IT and our computers and our case management. So they do continue, they fund us for more than the personnel costs. But you're right. At some point, all of the county employees will be gone. Everybody here will be a state employee. And so everybody will be making a lot less than the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, as opposed to some of those issues being in our office as well.
Right. And so the salary issue is a statewide issue because we have a statewide system, right? I mean, individual counties can't solve any perceived salary disparity problem. It's really up to the state legislature to address it in their funding of the state public defender system. Is that right?
Yes, although I think off the top of my head, I think that the salary difference would be $26,000 that our lawyers would be making less. And certainly there are other state departments where there is salary parity given cost of living in Hennepin County and that kind of thing. So yes, I mean, but there are districts in Minnesota where the county public defenders are making more than the county attorneys are, and which is good. You know, I support that, and I do believe that the state system has been good for most counties, except for this issue in ours. So I do believe, yes, at some point, this issue is not going to go away, is what I'm trying to say. Even when the county employees go away, this issue does not go away because we will continue to lose staff because they make $26,000 very quickly less than prosecutors do that they're working right across the aisle from. So at some point, and I don't know what that looks like, at some point, I think that needs to be corrected. And it would be nice if it was corrected on the state level.
And I just want to thank you for this exchange. I think it's important for the public members especially to understand the importance of engaging with the legislature around the vital role that our public defender system plays, and that it needs to be adequately funded, and that in whatever way people can support that work is really appreciated. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Committee Member Meyer. I'd like to say a few things here. As being one of the board members that was in on this process from the beginning, along with Board Member Lee, this all started when more than one of the employees in Mary's office came forward to Bill and Kevin with complaints and concerns, which they deemed serious enough to bring to the board's attention. I don't want that to get lost in here. Also, I'm used to a personnel committee meeting being private where we could discuss things more openly. This is Mary's right to have this as a public meeting, therefore we can't discuss much about the original complaints that started this process. About the same time these employees came forward with complaints, we saw the video of the meeting with the Hennepin Budget Committee meeting in which Mary
is
called
now
a
joining.
experiment and asked to be taken back by the county. This was just less than a month after Ms. Moriarty's presentation to our board about the state of her district, in which none of this was mentioned about not wanting to be a part of our state system. So because of these two things, we had concerns. The board unanimously voted to have Ms. Moriarty appear before the Personnel Committee to discuss these things. And that was sent to you, and this meeting happened. Within that meeting, all of these issues were discussed, and at the end of the meeting, it was clear that there were different viewpoints on what had actually happened. Now, in my more than 30-year career in personnel, when there is an issue like this that has such varying opinions, you have to sort it out. We cannot discount employees' concerns and complaints. We have to give them the right to speak. We also have to give Mary the right to speak and have her side represented, which is the board voted to have an independent investigation as to really where these issues were and what was the truth. And in order to do this, we placed Mary on a fully paid administrative leave while this investigation took place. As a result, he came back. We determined after the independent investigation provided their report.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Including talking to people that Mary herself had provided a list of. The board voted to issue a written reprimand outlining areas which we felt Mary could work on. And that's what you do in order to provide a framework for improvement. So I just wanted to get that out because I think that in this whole discussion, which after Mary spoke to the press after the meeting, or after she was placed on suspension, on paid suspension, the original complaints, the original substance of this became lost. And I just wanted to remind us, from my perspective, why we were there. So I don't really have a question. I just wanted to
Is
bring
now
that.
joining.
And sorry, Mary, I see that you have your hand up.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
So I wanted to say that I did give a presentation to the board, as you said, and I did talk extensively about salary parity. I didn't mention.
Mary, I couldn't hear that, but can you say that again? I think
Sure.
you're a little muted.
Okay. So I did bring up the issue of salary parity at that presentation to the board, and I just wanted to say that to the presentation to you.
Correct. I'm talking about wanting to be that you're a failed experiment, we're a failed experiment, and that you wanted to go back to the county. I was talking about that.
And I want to clarify again, you are not a failed experiment. I never said that. I don't think that. All of you board members volunteer your time. You do the best you can. These are difficult circumstances. And so I have been trying, and you know this for years, to push the conversation forward on salary parity. This isn't personal to you. All of you volunteer your time, and I appreciate that. So you're not a failed experiment. I wasn't saying that. And that was actually a quote from Commissioner Opat that I used because I was trying to get him to start a conversation too about what to do about this issue. So this isn't about you and the rest of the boards. I appreciate the time and effort that you have put in on a volunteer basis to help public defense in Minnesota.
Okay, thanks. Do either of the committee members have any further questions or comments?
Well,
Okay.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
are you, Madam Chair, what's the plan for the vote? Are we going to vote right away? Are we going to have a discussion between us?
My understanding is this is, you mean a private discussion or all within the context of the public meeting?
Right.
We are in a public meeting, so that's where we are. So any discussion we would have would be in this same context. If there's more discussion to be had, I welcome that. Otherwise,
Well, I just think we should close the comment part of the meeting and then move to deliberation.
I would agree. At this point, then, Committee Member Lee, is that fine with you as well?
Yes, I would concur, Chairperson Janetta, with Member Meyer's suggestion.
Okay. Well, there's one of two motions or three that we can entertain as a committee. A motion that the committee recommend to the full board that Ms. Moriarty be appointed for a 4-year term as Chief Public Defender of the 4th District, or we can recommend to the board that the board open up the position for applications at which Ms. Moriarty would be free to reapply, or we can not make a recommendation. So I am open for a motion to be made. Did everyone freeze or?
Chairperson Janetta, I would like for us to deliberate before we call for a vote on any of those three. I thought that's what Justice Meyer was suggesting was a deliberation. But if you are saying that there is no further deliberation, then I don't have an objection to moving straight forward to deciding what we want to do.
Well, my understanding of Robert's rules was that a motion is made and then there's discussion. If I'm not correct, let me know. Then I've maybe done it in the wrong order. If deliberation is fine.
Then I would defer to Justice Meyer for her opening remarks about deliberation, as she suggested that we move towards deliberation.
Okay. I'm happy to make just give you what my thoughts are. I'm passionate about our state system of public defense. My 10 years as a judge on the Supreme Court, as a justice on the Supreme Court, really opened my eyes to the incredible importance of the public defender system, the amazing advocates they have and argue. And I've done everything that I can to support the success of it throughout my judicial career and since. The legislature set out a scheme for creating parity and fairness within the system over 20 years ago. And Hennepin County has
now exiting.
Work in Hennepin County have struggled with it, and many have been vocally against it. At the time, they were vocally against it. And it's really disappointing to be at a place that's 20 years down the road with the lawyers in Hennepin County, some of the lawyers in Hennepin County, thinking that they should be treated in a more special way than the rest of the lawyers in the state. And in my view, there's a lot of room to talk about, should there be some kind of cost of living adjustment for the metro area versus outstate? And that's a fair policy decision, a fair policy discussion to have. But to suggest that Hennepin, is special in some way, I think is it's very troubling to me, because what we struggle within our system is to keep qualified lawyers in the outstate areas, and so that indigent accused in the outstate areas can receive the same high quality level of representation and as people might in the metro area. It's no secret that lawyers generally, there's exceptions, but most lawyers, would prefer to work in the cities. So it's a struggle to keep fairness and integrity and parity consistent throughout the system. I guess my thoughts, so that's the background for what I thought was a really troubling discussion, very troubling discussion at the county meeting, and Mary's views on this are widely known, that Hennepin County is not making enough, the lawyers aren't making enough money, and they aren't, and public defenders generally aren't making enough money. But the battle against the state system has to be put down. It has to be put down because it's divisive within the Hennepin County office. There are lawyers who are tired of hearing about the disparity and who are within the state, within the public defender system. And we just need to move on from that issue. I think that I strongly question whether Mary Moriarty is the person to lead us beyond that issue. We've received emails. So there's other things that I think about that weigh in my thoughts right now. The letters that we've received from the public about, and somewhere the narrative has been started, and each letter says the same thing. The board is getting ready to retaliate against Mary for her views on racial justice. And that's the narrative that we receive in the emails, but that doesn't make it true. Those emails, but it's not the only thing that weighs on my decision. I'm not a legislator. I'm not voted in and out of office by the people. I was appointed by the Chief Justice. Three of us were appointed by the government, and we've been appointed to this position because we all have experience and knowledge that presumably helps us make informed decisions that are in the best interest of the entire system. So that weighs on me. The factors that I consider are the feedback. Mr. Ward's report to us is certainly one piece of data that I read and consider. I also consider feedback from the judges who work in Hennepin County and have direct contact with Ms. Moriarty. I think it's significant that all of the judges in Hennepin County were invited to give this board feedback on Mary's performance. And of the 60-some judges in Hennepin County, only 3 judges responded with positive feedback about her performance. And those are confidential, as they should be, because that's a typical, when an employee is being evaluated, feedback is always given confidentially. I consider feedback from Mary's managers and supervisors, past and present. And this is important because she had 2 highly regarded managers who, with whom she developed fractured relationships. They both left the office because they felt they couldn't work with Mary any further. They both now work within the Hennepin County system doing other important work. I consider the feedback we've gotten from from supervisors in the office. I consider feedback from what we call line attorneys. Line attorneys are the lawyers in the office who are not team leaders or managers. And within the office, Mary has positive feedback, which is wonderful. The line attorneys, majority, speak highly of her, and that is considered. I consider that. I consider the feedback from individuals locally and nationally who've attested to Ms. Moriarty's skills as an educator and a trainer. That's a factor that I consider. I consider feedback from lawyers who work within the county attorney's office. And because I have experience as a judge, it's important to know that individuals within the county attorney's office are very dedicated to improving justice for everyone. They're highly motivated to do so. Not everyone is, but there are individuals who are. And so that's why it's important. Aside from just racial injustice, it's important to be able to work with our justice partners on all sorts of issues, administrative issues that require close attention. I consider that we have a chief who has, in the last year or two, suffered fractured relationships with her direct supervisor and with Kevin Kyer, who is this board's chief executive officer.
Joseph McInnes.
So those
Is now exiting.
relationships are fractured. I consider all of that. And I go on and on, but all these, so what to me emerges is a picture of a chief who has some very strong allies and then some detractors, some people who feel strongly that she's not effective. So I would call it a fractured leadership. And this is an employee who's been issued a reprimand for certain behaviors, and who has been asked to make substantial and sustained effort to repair working relationships with key partners by implementing a more collaborative approach to problem solving. And I know collaboration is an overused term, but regardless of the meaning of that, those were, an employer, this board gave an employee a directive to make improvements. There's a rejection of the discipline. Ms. Moriarty has publicly rejected the discipline, said that it was inappropriate. The problems lie elsewhere. The problems don't lie with her behavior.
Is now exiting.
I just think it's important to understand the difference between being effective
Brenna Romlow
and being
is now
ineffective
joining.
around issues, whatever the issue is. What we're looking for is effective leadership. And effective leadership requires relationship building. It requires working together. That's the commitment. That's the stated goal of this board and the organization. And that's what we need. I just think we need a leader in Hennepin County who can be an effective leader for the office and who could be an effective leader for the entire state public defender system, who can work collaboratively with justice partners, call out racial injustice, form working teams, work with our leadership, work with this board, work with Kevin, work with her managers to be a strong advocate for the promise of good representation for every Minnesotan.
Is now exiting.
I just think this organization, I think that the lawyers and most of all the clients of this organization deserve a leader who can lead us forward, who is not backward looking, but someone who can lead us forward, who's not always litigating past wrongs, but someone who has a vision for the future, for how to move Hennepin County and the entire state forward. I think that leader isn't Mary Moriarty. I think that we have an opportunity to open up this position, bring some new energy into this position, take applications. We have many people now seeking to help improve our justice system. There's so much energy, good energy going in that direction. And, weighing all the factors, this is where I come to. This is I think we need to move forward. And I think my belief is that we should thank Mary for her service as chief. And that we recommend to the full board that we open the application process. Thank you.
Committee Member Meyer, is that a motion that you've made, or are we at that point?
Unknown
Chairperson Janetta,
participant is now
I
joining.
would also like to comment on deliberations as well.
Okay.
Before we take the vote.
Sure. Committee Member Lee, Mary had her hand up. Did you want to briefly say something there? Just briefly, because we're going to go into Committee Member Lee. Okay, you're muted, Mary.
There I go. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say about the input from the judges. My understanding was that the ad hoc committee members gathered input from the judges and plan to give that separately because I was interested that there were only 3 judges, as Justice Meyer said, in Mr. Ward's memo. I did ask a couple of judges about that, and they said their understanding was to submit their feedback to the ad hoc members. So I just want to say I'm not clear that that has been shared with the board, because I certainly have heard from a number of judges who thought that they weighed in.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ward, did you want to respond to that, or?
Madam Chair, I can, and what the ad hoc board members are, and those board members are Judge Barnett and Judge Lamas. They are the ones who forwarded the emails from the other sitting judges. And I got a total of 6 responses from the seated bench judges in Hennepin County. And as you're aware, there was one judge who sent a correspondence directly to the board and did not reach out to me.
Thank you. Committee Member Lee.
I would first like to say that the outpouring of public interest on this process has been really wonderful. I've read every single letter, every single email that has been sent to me regarding Mary's reappointment process. As a matter of fact, I was up at 2:13 in the a.m. in this morning reading one that came in at 2:13 a.m. What I take issue with is almost uniformly that those emails contain an allegation, an insinuation that the board is retaliating against Mary for her social justice advocacy, her racial disparity advocacy. I take issue with that because our entire organization, not just the 4th District Chief, fights for these things, fights against these things on a daily basis. I just want to make it clear for this record and those in attendance that my board membership serves you. It doesn't serve an individual. It serves all residents. And I appreciate your input, and I take it to heart. I too have taken into account all of the things that Justice Meyer has mentioned, so I'm not going to regurgitate that. I think what uniformly concerns me is that there's been an irretrievable breakdown within our own house between Mary, between Mr. Ward, between Mr. Kyer, and also the board itself. We had a long teleconference with Mary in March. Part of that discussion, I requested some waivers that were obtained for social media posts of 2 clients who are ultimately the most vital and should be the most protected interests of the work that we do. two clients of Hennepin County who their cases and their information were discussed in social media. And Mary, thank you. At that teleconference, you stated, fantastic, I'll get them to you. They're on my desk. As soon as I'm reinstated, I'll get them to you. Well, we waited until April, and then we reached out to you because we had not received them. And we sought those releases for those kind of things because we have to protect the interests of the clients that are directly represented by our line attorneys in each judicial district. What we got back was photo releases that required a witness signature that did not have a witness signature. Subsequent to that, almost, in my recollection, almost a few days from that, we get a letter from the legal representatives of Ms. Moriarty.
Is now exiting.
Notice threatening lawsuit and giving us a notice of claims. This is not a collaborative, interactive working relationship.
Is now joining.
And that's my biggest concern. Again, obviously our justice partners and their input are significant. Obviously, Mr. Ward and Mr. Kyer's work are important, but to me, it is up to each and every board member, based upon their information that they've been presented from this independent investigation throughout the course of this entire process, to make their own individual judgment as part of their obligations. And in good faith, I cannot say that this can continue to work when there is a uniform breakdown between the chief of 4th District, Judicial District, and the entire statewide system. And those reasons have been given by Justice Meyer. I've added a few more. And those are my biggest concerns. And I want to address one last point. And this is what Mary said at the December 18th meeting, as well as the just today, is that nothing would come of it. That, to me, states a complete distrust and mistrust for the board. There's a very structured hierarchy within our organization. I can assure the public, Mr. Ward's opinion, Mr. Kyer's opinion, nor any of the other board members.
Jared Mullenkoff.
Other board members
exiting.
Are going to dictate my individual obligation to reach an informed decision based upon the performance of Chief Moriarty's professional obligations to this organization.
Thank you, Board Member Lee.
Emily Lem
is now exiting.
Do we have a motion? Would someone like to put forth a motion?
Chairperson Janetta, I believe that Justice Meyer had previously motioned for a non-reappointment and to open up the position. Yeah.
Statement. The motion is to recommend to the full board that the board open up the chief public defender position for the 4th District, to have it open for applications. That's the motion?
Yes, that's correct.
Is there a second?
I would second that motion.
So the motion was made by, the motion was made by Board Member Meyer, seconded by Board Member Lee. Is there discussion on this motion?
Well, I think we've said our thoughts. I'd like to hear the chair's thoughts.
Thank you. You know, I've been on this board a long time, and I've been in the human resource profession before I retired for a long time. I know Mary. I have sat through some trainings of Mary's over the years. I've watched Mary in action. Mary's an excellent attorney. She's an excellent trainer. She's a mentor. She's a proponent for social justice.
Is now
Good.
exiting.
I also know what the internal points of being a chief public defender of a judicial district are. We see it from the inside. I'm happy to have received a lot of comment from the public about Mary's job, and I believe that what they see is the truth. But this job is from an internal view,
Is
about
now
being
joining.
a statewide system. And to that point, I think that Mary is not the best person for that position going forward. I agree with both
Is now exiting.
members' positions. I had the same concerns as Committee Member Lee about the waiver of the signing of waiving their rights to have the expungement issue. And I don't think that this is she is the best candidate going forward. I would like to see this open. Thank you. So do we have a motion on the floor? And is seconded. All in favor of recommending to... Oh, I do the vote. The motion is to recommend to the full board that the board open up the position for applicants. We'll do a roll call here. Committee Member Lee.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
I'm sorry. The motion is to recommend to the board that the board open up the position for applicants. I will do this by roll call so that people can hear this. Board Member Lee.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
I vote in favor of the motion.
Board Member Meyer.
I vote aye.
And Board Member Janetta, I vote aye. The motion is passed. I guess now I will take motion to adjourn the meeting.
Is now exiting.
So moved.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
All in favor?
Christine Kohler.
The meeting is
Is now
adjourned.
exiting.